You are junior, you've only been doing this for a little while. Nobody expects you to know everything, and nobody knows everything, right? And if they do, they're lying or they're faking it. Like, trust me, like totally. I've been at my company for 4 years. I've been in marketing for like over 6 years. I still am clueless on certain things, or some days I wake up and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, and that happens to everyone. So if people say that they're not like that, they're bloody lying. So avoid those people, they're toxic.
So true. Do you find yourself winging your way through life, hoping you'll figure it all out on the way? Hello, it's me, Gaby Mendez, your 20s wing woman, and you're listening to the Talk Twenties podcast. Here you'll find me chatting to influential 20-somethings on different topics that matter to you in your 20s and all the things we never got taught in school. This is your ultimate guide to adult life. So if you're ready, let's go. Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Talk Twenties podcast. Today I am delighted to be joined in the studio by the one, the only fairy job mother, also known as Shoshanna Davis. Hello Shoshanna, thank you so much for coming into the studio.
Hi Gaby, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
I'm so excited to have you here. We've actually road tripped, haven't we?
Yep.
My hometown, Cheltenham, Gloucestershire. Your boyfriend is from there. We were both there this weekend. Yes. So we've road tripped all the way up to Liverpool to the studio before you head back to your current hometown of London. So thank you so much for doing that. You run an incredible platform called Fairy Job Mother, which you started in the past couple of years, pretty much during the whole lockdown period. Tell us a little bit more about what you do, because it's amazing and I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, so essentially what Fairy Job Mother is it's a platform to empower students, graduates and young professionals with the skills and mindset to stand out, get hired and progress. And really the main reason that I started Fairy Job Mother is, well, I had the idea for quite a while, but obviously lockdown happened. But essentially the how I came about the idea was essentially when I was at uni, I really struggled with and even at school actually, I really struggled with the career advice that I was given. Every time I would go to the career services and I had questions, it was just the same generic answers. And after a while, I kind of figured out that the staff in the career services, they had either come from an education background or they'd worked in the industry, but like 20 years ago. So it got to the point where I was kind of just like, okay, like what more do you know about finding a job than I actually do? And obviously fast forwarding to now, I work for a global company. I've been able to progress pretty well there. And I have a lot of experience in all different areas. So I wanted to just do something with all of that knowledge to help other young people who I know are also struggling in that area.
Yeah, definitely. I think we chatted about it when we were on our road trip today, but I said one of the main things that I get a lot of business people wanting to come onto the podcast. But maybe a lot of our listeners, they're actually working full time and never want to be a business owner or stuff like that. And they just want to get ahead in the job and the current role that they are in. And I think what's great about you is you've got a bit of both. So you're still working full time for a Fortune 500 company, which is amazing. And you've got all that experience, 6-7 years in that company. But then you've also got this element on the side where you're helping young people do the same. And there's a business element for you, but ultimately what you're trying to help people do is get jobs, get hired by other companies. And I think your content that you put out is amazing. I've learned so many things from doing it. So I think a lot of young people should definitely look you up on social media. But today we're going to be chatting a lot more about jobs and, how to progress in your career, because I think for a lot of people, we've talked a little bit on the podcast previously about job search strategy and how it's a difficult job market at the moment. We haven't talked so much about once you've got a job or once you're in an industry that you enjoy, how do you catapult yourself? How do you get to those dream jobs that you want to work in within an organization? How do you land yourself those opportunities that you've always wanted? So in terms of just like looking at it, how have you yourself managed to get ahead in your career?
Yeah, good question. Well, I guess maybe some background about myself might be helpful. So I didn't really like school that much. I just found it super boring. I wasn't a particularly academic person at all. I was all about the social aspect. So I came out of school with not the best A-level, not the best GCSEs, and definitely not the best A-levels. So I applied to university. I had my 3 top choices. I failed to get into either of those because I just did rubbish in my A-levels. So I ultimately got into university through clearing, and I remember phoning up my university and literally having to like beg them to let me in because I really like didn't have the requirements that they were looking for at all. So I yeah, so when I found out my A-level results, I remember being really upset, really disappointed. But obviously my parents were disappointed in me. And I knew after that, like I kind of needed to do something with my life. I needed to take things seriously. So obviously I started at university, knew that I didn't have, you know, the good grades, but I always kind of knew that in order to get ahead and to kind of overcompensate for the lack of what I had, I need to really make sure I got some solid work experience. So throughout my time at university, I was literally always seeking work. So I worked, did internship pretty much every summer. I did a placement year when I was in my final year of uni. I worked for a startup. So I was lucky enough to finish uni with about two plus years of like relevant marketing experience, which put me in quite a good position. So I already had a lot of working knowledge. And then of course, I started at my current company, which is Intel. So yeah, that's just a little bit of background for myself as to how I've got into the position I'm in today. And I think just in general at Intel, so Intel was the company that I did my placement year at. So obviously like I had a bit of background. However, I did my placement year in Ireland and I was hired into the UK. So I didn't get my full-time job because I worked at Intel. I didn't know anyone in the UK. It was essentially just through networking, and I got on very well with my manager that I did my placement year with, and I stayed in contact with him. Like I remember I would like send Christmas cards to everybody that I worked with at Intel like every year because I wanted them to remember me in case anything came up. And then of course when I saw this role come up, I of course just reached out to my manager. I said, can you refer me? And then of course I went through the general interview stages, but all the work experience I had in addition to that was super relevant. So it helped me get that role. And then obviously since then I've been there. So I only graduated in 2017, so 4 years ago. And I've had about 4 or 5 different roles in that time. So I've pretty much had a new role every year. I started out, good question, what did I start out in? So I started out in like a marketing role where I was covering Europe, Middle East and Africa. And then I did that for about a year. And then I did a product marketing role, essentially. Then I did that for a little while. Then I got put into like a business development type marketing role.
And was this you like applying for each job every single time? Or was it putting yourself out there? Did someone come to you with these opportunities? Or were you actively always looking for these new roles?
So a bit of both. So I'm kind of always actively looking for new things. So essentially when I first started at Intel, I was like, you need to kind of just... It's probably not advice that I would give to someone now, potentially. Well, not someone in my position, but I think when you are first starting out, I said I'm going to say yes to everything just so that I can speak to as many people and so I can meet as many people as I want. So at my current company, we have these things called like development opportunities. So essentially what they're like short-term assignments. Maybe someone's gone on maternity leave or maybe someone's gone on sabbatical. You can essentially apply for those. And you can ask your manager if they will allocate you, like, I don't know, 20 or 30% of your time or 1 day a week to do this other role. So I was always kind of doing those in between. So I had extra things. So within my first year, I was able to like secure one of those opportunities where I was covering someone that had about like 15 more years experience than me.
Yeah.
And at my work, we have these like different grade levels. And just for some context, so when I first joined, I was like 3, which was like the lowest one. And this person was like a 7 or an 8. And like within my first 6 months, I was able to cover that person. So I would say I was always kind of actively looking for things and always contacting different people and learning about what they do, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of like your fairy job mother side of things, if someone comes to you and they say, I'm really looking to get ahead in my career, I'm really looking to progress within the current company that I'm working in, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Probably the first thing that I would say is, because a lot of people I think do try and get ahead too quickly. And, you know, they're always like, oh, how can I get to the next stage? How can I get to the next stage? But they're not really thinking like, have I actually done a good job of what I've been given so far? So really at first making sure within your current role that you understand what is expected of you and you understand what your goals are. You need to be delivering on those goals first because that's the bare minimum that's expected of you in your job, right? And a lot of people get caught up.
I know. So everyone's like, and even like, I think a lot of people like to ask at interview, like, what's the progression like? And which is a really great like thing to be asking, but it kind of shows that like people might be jumping the gun sometimes, especially if they haven't quite got their own role nailed at that moment in time.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously make sure you actually understand what is expected of you, like how your success is going to be measured. Once you've done that, of course, you can then start delivering on those objectives. Once you've done that, then you can start, you know, exceeding those. That's what you need. So understand what is expected of you, deliver on those, start exceeding those, and then, you know, have a discussion with your manager. I think one piece of advice that I would give for anyone, which has been so important for me, is whenever I'm going for a role, whenever I'm interviewing, like I'm essentially like interviewing that person, and usually you're interviewing with the manager, right? So I'm essentially interviewing them, because your manager, that is the person that's going to help you progress. Like if you don't get on with your manager, chances are you're not going to do well at the company. You're not going to get promoted. So you need to really make sure you ask those questions, so you can actually understand what type of person they're going to be and what they're going to help, like if they're going to help you. So that relationship is super important. So obviously once you're exceeding those goals, you know, you want to have a chat with your manager, you know, let them know this is where I'm at. I'd really like to move into this position. Like, how do you see that working for me? What are those key deliverables that you think that I'm going to have to achieve to get there? And just keep having that conversation. I think another thing that's really important as well, that people don't really think about is make sure that you are actually getting visibility for the work that you're doing, because you can be doing the most amazing work in the world. You can be working your arse off, but if your manager doesn't know about it and if your colleagues don't know about it, then like you're not going to get promoted, because nobody knows about it.
So true.
And also usually when like your managers may be thinking about promoting you, they are going to seek feedback from other people. So if other people know what you're doing, they can essentially be your advocates. Whereas if they don't know, then they're not really going to help you out there. So I would say another thing is make sure that you are actually getting visibility for the work that you're doing.
If you befriend your colleagues and you're honest and open with them about where you're hoping to go, I think that's another good thing when you're trying to progress in your career. If you're open and honest with the people around you that you are working with, and you say to them, I've been working on this and I would really like it to lead me to doing this, then, you know, if they're a good friend, and, you know, often work colleagues really are, they become, you know, like lifelong friends and stuff like that, they're going to want to help you, and they're going to want to, you know, say to your manager, you know, Shoshanna's been doing an amazing job at this. Like, they're going to want to help you out to get to where you want to go. So I think it's about being honest and open with the people around you at work. Like, one of the things I think a lot of people feel nervous about, you know, showing their ambition, because they're nervous of potentially like what other people will think, or perhaps there's a competitive nature behind it, and then that's why people hold back. But ultimately, I think most people want to help you get to where you want to go. And I think you just need to go off like the vibes of the people that you work with, find out who you can trust and get them on board and get them supportive, so that you can try and get to where you want to go. Would you agree?
No, absolutely. I would agree. You definitely need the help and support of your colleagues. And just when you were saying that, I kind of thought another thing. I think another thing is important is like, a lot of people that I speak to, or a lot of people, especially when they're starting off in their career, which is understandable, you feel like you need a lot of guidance, but essentially like no one's going to make your career happen for you. You need to make it happen yourself. So you need to actively be seeking out those opportunities. Don't just expect your managers to be like, okay, Gabby, I want you to work on this, right? You need to be actively thinking, okay, I'm doing this now. This department looks really interesting. Like, can I maybe speak to my manager and say, I'm really interested in this department? Like, can I dedicate a couple hours a week or on Friday afternoon to shadow them? That's an example of proactively doing something. Your manager's not just going to be psychic and say to you, oh, Gabby, you should try this. So really you need to take your own action and make things happen for yourself, and don't just expect them to happen, because you're probably not really going to get anywhere.
Yeah. And I think like off the back of that, if you're really wanting to learn about a certain area of a business, or you're wanting to come up with a few ideas, there are hundreds of thousands of online courses, platforms that you can learn from and upskill. And that is relevant whether you stay at that company or move somewhere else. Like if there is something that you are really excited by, whether that's marketing, product design, sales, or whatever, go and do a course about it in your own time. Go into work and say, you know, I've been doing this in my free time. And chances are, if like an employer sees that, or your manager sees that, they'll go, oh, they're pretty serious about this, because they've been using their time outside of work to work on this. And then pitch it to them, say, I'd really like this to help me get this opportunity. And I think that's a really positive way that, like, if you know you really want to learn skills in it, if you potentially don't think that you can do it within the role that you've got right now, go out and do it yourself, and then come back to them and go, I've done this work. Now can you help me do this, or can you help me do that? I think that's a really positive way of, you know, that no matter whether that helps you move forward within your current business or not, it's still going to look great on your CV that you went out and did some kind of course to upskill, whether it's relevant to your job or not.
Absolutely.
And I know people who've done that and used it to get, you know, jobs in different companies, or changed to a completely different department that is essentially a career change, to be honest, from actually going out and doing their own work outside of it. So I think it's not just about what is within your organization that you can do. It's also about looking elsewhere and kind of, you know, seeing what other opportunities are out there as well. You talk a lot, and you've already said it a lot already. You talk a lot about networking and how important networking is.
Yeah.
Tell me your top tips for networking.
I guess it depends in what sense you're trying to network. So networking for me during COVID is a lot different to normal.
Yeah.
So probably my answer is going to be a bit, you know, COVID friendly digital networking focused. I'm a massive fan of LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I can't think of any other platform where you can literally find anybody in any role at any single company and just contact them. It's just unheard of before LinkedIn. I just don't know how people did these things.
Yeah.
So LinkedIn is an amazing tool. So I think it all goes back to, like, you know, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? Because once you understand that, you can be quite targeted with your networking. So for example, I don't know, I'm somebody that's in a marketing assistant role or marketing executive role, and maybe in the next 3 to 4 years, I'd like to become a marketing manager. Probably in that sense, it's going to make sense for you to then be communicating with people in that role. So obviously, once you've identified the role that you're interested in, maybe what type of industry are you interested in? Once you've identified those, you can, of course, then use LinkedIn to reach out to those people in an authentic way. I get loads and loads of spam messages on LinkedIn. They're super annoying. They're clearly just people that have copied and pasted their message. I don't reply to them. I ignore them. The messages that I do reply to are those where they've really clearly made an effort to consciously
personalised, aren't they?
Look at my profile,
Yeah.
see what I do, tell them, like, you know, why I should actually speak to them and what value it's going to bring me. So I think on LinkedIn, like, look at the person's profile, pick out a common interest or something you have in common, or maybe why you're impressed with their experience. And then they're a lot more likely to speak to you. So, you know, make it personalized, make it authentic. Don't make it just transactional. So once you've got that person, you've had that chat and you've got what you want from them, or you haven't got what you want from them, don't just, like, forget about them. Like, networking is an ongoing thing. Just because you speak to someone once and you don't get a job from it, that's okay, right? Who knows? You can stay connected with them, and that's something that I'd always recommend. Once you've met someone, you know, ask them, can I stay connected with you? If it's in person, like, can we connect on LinkedIn, or can you give me my email? And then, you know, you can just give them an update every few months. So, you know, hi, Gaby, since we last spoke, I've been able to do this, this, and this. Just so, again, similar to, like, the Christmas card thing I said, just that you're top of mind.
Yeah, I love
so
it.
that if an opportunity does come up, then you're going to be there. Or if, you know, they find some, and so yeah, I would definitely say that, ensuring it's authentic. Another top tip I have is, if you've met someone, once you've spoken to them, a good question that I always really like to ask is there anyone else you recommend that I connect with, or is there anyone that you might be able to introduce me to on this topic? And obviously, once you've got your foot in the door, that person is going to have their own network that they can help you tap into. So I think those would probably be my main tips.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the things is, when you go to an in-person networking event, is, like, get someone's LinkedIn, like, connect with people. I went to an in-person networking event, and I always find them super, like, scary and stuff like that. We've got our own networking event coming up on Wednesday, which is very exciting.
Looks amazing.
But when I go to the ones that I kind of would say are more like generic networking events, I tend to be the youngest person in the room, which is kind of, like, quite a scary thought. And I do find them quite intimidating, and I think it's really tricky. But, like, one of the things that happened when I went to my last one is that an attendee list was sent out. So it was all the people's names of people who had attended, so you could keep track of who you'd spoken to and all of this. And I went through that list, and I literally, because it was like a local networking event, I thought all of them are going to be relevant at some stage. And even if they're not particularly relevant, they might know someone who could be a good connection for me. So I went and connected with every single one of them on LinkedIn, and I sent them all a personalized message saying, hi, I don't know if I got to speak to you at the event, but I saw that you were on the attendee list. It would be lovely to just connect with you, just so that we're in each other's circles.
Yeah.
And honestly, of those messages that I sent, 95% of people replied and said, oh, I'm so sorry I didn't get to chat to you. They looked at my page. They were like, I love your business idea. And, like, I had a whole other bunch of people
amazing.
who I'd not actually spoken to an event. I didn't actually have to walk up and say the awkward hello or do anything like that. But I've, like, had, you know, really great conversations. And actually, I've got a job off the back of it. Like, so I've got some work off the back of someone who was physically present at a networking meeting that I was at, but we didn't actually speak at that event. But after the event, we've networked and I've got some work from it. So I think that's one of the ways that, like, you can use both in-person and digital to your advantage. There's so many different ways that you can do it. And just by the personalized note we were in the same room at the same time, basically.
Yeah.
We didn't speak though. So I think there's so many different ways you can do it, and just be honest, because that was just me being like, you know, I wasn't trying to sell them something. I wasn't trying to pitch them something. I was literally saying, hi, I saw you at that event. Like literally as chilled and as relaxed as that. Because I think sometimes, like you say, when it's like transactional and it's like, you know, you're trying to get a job out of it or something like this, feels like there's an added pressure, and on both parties can then like not want to start up a conversation. So I think it's really, really tricky. So there's plenty of like authentic ways that you can do that.
Yeah, I think that's such a good example. And I think probably the key there is you took advantage of that opportunity and you actually did it in good time. Whereas if you would have left it like 2 weeks, then even if that person had been at that event, they're probably, you know, that was 2 weeks ago. I don't care about it now.
It was literally like the next day pretty much. So it was kind of like, oh, like it made sense to them that I had sent that message. So I think if you're doing stuff like that and you've got the opportunity to do things, not every networking event is going to send out an attendee list, you know, and everyone had like GDPR, everyone had agreed to that. Like it was all okay. But yeah, like, it, you know, that's the kind of ways that you can make networking really, really work for you. One of the things that we chatted about when we were like planning for this podcast episode is talking about being in your 20s and having a role where you've got lots of autonomy and lots of independence in your role, and you're trusted to do a lot of the things. Like most of us, when we're in our 20s, we're in usually entry level roles, or we're kind of lower down the rungs of kind of leadership and et cetera. And sometimes a lot of people can find that they don't have much autonomy in their job, or they've got a manager who is watching over them all the time. In terms of like finding roles and opportunities that give you that autonomy, what would you recommend to people? What are the kind of questions they should be asking at interview? When should they be kind of, you know, what should they expect from different roles? Like it's kind of a tricky period to navigate, don't you think?
Yes, it's definitely a tricky period. I mean, I think for me, it probably comes back to really at the interview stage, like assessing that person who's going to be your manager and making sure you ask those questions. I think a key question for me would always be, you know, how would you describe your management style? Obviously they can probably BS their answer, but usually you can tell if it's like genuine and authentic or not. Throughout the interview process, I would be concerned if I haven't spoken to any of the other team members. So if you haven't, make sure you do before accepting a job, because obviously you can get inputs from them. Other key questions. I mean, there's so many. What did I say? Management style. I could think just in general, finding a bit more about the role and really analysing the job description and maybe picking out some key things that you already feel confident with or that you already have experience in, and maybe asking, would your manager, like, how much autonomy will I actually have on those? Or, I'm really experienced in these, or I'm really interested in this area. Like, would you feel comfortable with me just leading that for the team? But honestly, I think it comes down to a manager, right? That person is going to be in charge of what you do. That person is going to decide to give you autonomy or not going to give you autonomy. And if you have like a micromanager, then chances are you're not going to have autonomy. So really just assess them in every way possible, and just make sure you're asking those.
Do you think it's right to move on from a role if you're really struggling with, like, you have got a micromanager or you don't have autonomy in your role? Do you think that's like a totally fair enough reason for someone to leave their role?
Yes, I do think that's, I do. I mean, I couldn't think of anything worse than working for like a micromanager. I'm like such an independent person. I like doing everything not everything on my own, but I like just being given things and left with them. And it can be really suffocating when there's someone like constantly on your back. So yes, it's absolutely a good enough reason. Like, even if you've only been in the role for like, I don't know, a month and you're super unhappy. I mean, for me personally, when starting a new role, I always tell people that I think it takes at least 6 months for you to actually fully settle in, because there's so much you need to learn. There's all these different people, there's all the products and departments, and it takes you a while to actually get to grips with that. So I tell them to give it time. However, if you've just started and something, really doesn't feel right, then, for the sake of your own mental health, I wouldn't suggest staying there. Sometimes people do worry about, I've only been there for a month, or I've only been there for 2 months. Like, is it going to look bad? But honestly, I would say as long as you have like a genuine valid reason, which you do, a decent employer is going to understand that. And if they don't, then it's not somewhere you want to be working anyway, to be quite honest.
I think trust is so important when it comes to like working in a company, because trust and autonomy is like they go hand in hand. Essentially, the more your manager trusts you to get stuff done, the more autonomy you're going to be given in your role, because they're not going to be checking whether you've done each and every part of it. So I think the more that you're trusted to do what you do most of the time, the happier you will be. I mean, every single company works differently, and lots of companies need different approval processes, and that might just be the way that a company is. But I think ultimately it's got to feel like a right culture fit for you as well. Like, it's got to be something that, some people do really like having the reassurance of someone checking it over and going, yeah, that's okay, or someone checking in and reminding them of deadlines and things like that. That might really work for some people, but if it doesn't work for you, I wouldn't feel embarrassed about moving on, even though if you've only been there for a short period of time. Or
exactly. And like, I guess it depends on the relationship, but like maybe just like bring it up to your manager, because sometimes people, if somebody's worked a certain way for a long period of time, then it comes pretty much a habit and pretty much normal to them, and they may be oblivious as to how you're feeling. So, if you do feel comfortable, I probably would suggest doing that. Or maybe some managers at the beginning, because you're super new, they probably maybe want to have a bit more reins on, but then in a few months' time, once you're proving yourself, that may relax. It does depend on the situation, but I would, obviously, like Gaby said and I said, if you're super unhappy, then consider leaving. But maybe I would probably speak to your manager about it first. If you feel comfortable, just have that conversation and just say, look, I feel confident doing this. Would you be able to give me a little more autonomy, a little bit of flexibility? And then how they react to that conversation is really telling of who they are as a person and a manager. Whereas if you don't even bring it up, you just leave, then it's like, have you really tried to resolve the situation? Probably not.
Yeah. No, you're so right there. I think you're spot on. When it comes, like you mentioned there, about confidence in your role as well, I think this really comes with time. When I first started out in any job, when I first graduated, I don't know about you, but I was like so nervous. I second guessed literally everything. I know there's graduates all over the country who, especially they're like starting their first roles on like Zoom, or have been in like, different situations. Like, it's really difficult to navigate. And when you're trying to like build your initial career confidence, I think, I benefited from the fact that I could maybe speak to someone whilst I was making a cup of tea, and it felt very informal. But like sometimes, and some people are starting jobs where they're immediately like thrown into management meetings, or, really, scary meetings where they don't really know who they're speaking to, or they don't know these people in like a kind of, as you'd meet someone in the office really, or you're communicating with teams from all over the country. It can feel overwhelming at times. Like, I know you work with a global department of Intel, don't you? So you work with people all over the world. When it comes to career confidence and establishing yourself as someone who's kind of confident in what they're doing in their 20s, if there's someone out there who's really struggling with this, what kind of advice would you give to someone who is really, really struggling? Maybe they feel uncomfortable speaking up in meetings. Maybe they want to feel more comfortable asking for that promotion. Like how would you say to be more confident within your role?
Yeah, so I would say, I think my first piece of advice is, obviously, if you're someone in your 20s, you've not been working for years and years. So in the grand scheme of things, you are still relatively junior. So just remember that, like, you are junior. You've only been doing this for a little while. Nobody expects you to know everything. Like, they really don't. And nobody knows everything, right? And if they do, they're lying or they're faking it. Like, trust me, like, totally. I've been at my company for 4 years. I've been in marketing for like over 6 years. I still am clueless on certain things, or some days I wake up and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. And that happens to everyone. So if people say that they're not like that, they're bloody lying. So avoid those people. They're toxic.
So true.
So I would say, just remember, like, no one expects you to know everything. Number 2, I would start really thinking about the areas that you feel less confident in. And again, obviously, if you do have that good relationship with your manager, then of course you can bring those up and you can ask for their advice. I'm part of a mentor program for an organisation, and one of the girls that I mentor, there's a couple of things that she's struggling with. So one of the things that she is struggling with is she works with a lot of senior stakeholders who happen to be male. She's the only female and she's quite junior, and she struggles with speaking up in meetings and giving her opinions and stuff. So one of the things that we've been working on is different areas to explore that. So one of the things that she's done is she's been, identifying people that she thinks that are female that do a good job of speaking up in meetings, so she can kind of mirror them and learn from them. Another thing she's exploring is, which I suggested, is Because in a lot of her meetings, it's like giving feedback on projects and stuff. So I said, how about this? Why don't you review the material beforehand, email them over, these are the points I'd like to cover, or these are the pieces of feedback that I'd like to go through, so that on the call, it doesn't have to be this awkward thing of, oh, I looked at your document and these are like the 5 things I want to bring up. She can just refer to her email, and so everybody knows. And then another thing with she's been working on is, it may sound a bit silly, but recording herself. So in these Zoom COVID days, it's not such an odd thing to record meetings, right? So we've been looking at recording them, so that number one, she can actually listen back to herself and see how she communicates, where she can improve on, all the different areas. But then she also has those recordings to like look back on over time, so she can really see the improvement.
I love that. I think that's really, and I really like the idea of kind of like sending an email beforehand, because then it's very easy to go, according to my email, or like, what I wrote, you're just going off my email.
Yeah,
like
and so
what
it's
I
just
said.
not such a surprise to everyone.
And it's like, it can help you, like, especially if you can take however long you like to write an email, but you can't always think on the spot when you're on Zoom, and it can feel a little bit uncomfortable, like all eyes on you and all of that kind of stuff. Like, I love that. I think all of those points are really, really great advice. You mentioned there about mentoring and how important you found that yourself about having mentors, but then obviously you are now a mentor to other people. Yeah. If someone is looking to progress in their career, I know one of the number one things you say is to get yourself a mentor. Yeah. How does someone go about this?
Oh, good question. Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways. So I think for me, a lot of people overthink mentorship. They think, oh, you have to be part of like some exclusive programs. Yes, there are exclusive mentorship programs, but really, you probably already have a mentor. It's just, you've not said to them, oh, can I be your mentor?
It's
but essentially, it's just informal. It's someone that you look up to, and they provide you help and guidance on a particular topic. So I would first start with who you know right now, somebody that may be informally mentoring you. Can you ask them for it to be a more formal thing? So maybe at the moment you only chat when you need help, but can you make it a weekly chat or a monthly chat? So of course, look at who you have right now that informally mentors you. But then probably actually potentially, maybe even I'd start with looking what are my goals? So, what are my short-term goals? What are my long-term goals? Where do I want to be in the next 6 months to a year? And where do I want to be in the next 2 to 3 years? Because once you've identified those, then you can identify the mentors you need. So like I said, if you're somebody that wants to be, a marketing manager in 2 to 3 years, then probably it makes sense for you to be seeking somebody that's in that position. So maybe you could first start with looking at your company. Even if it's someone you don't know, can you look on LinkedIn to see who you have? Can your manager connect you to someone? Another thing I would say also is if you work for a global company, don't just limit your search to the UK. So for example, the girl that I mentor is looking for a mentor at her work. And I said, look, you work. She's like, oh, I've looked on the UK database. I can't find him. I'm like, you work for a global company, right? What about all these people in America? So don't just like limit your search to somebody in the UK. I think another thing I would say is, another thing you can say is people have this impression that you can only have one mentor, which is completely untrue. Like, you can have as many mentors as you want. You can be really selfish. You could have, one mentor for working on public speaking. You can have one mentor for working on, asking for a promotion. You can have as many as you want. So don't feel like you have to limit yourself to one. And another thing I would really recommend is, it's actually really good to have a mentor inside your organization. But it's also really good to have a mentor outside of your organization, because don't forget, somebody inside your organization, their perspectives are going to be pretty warped by the organization that they're in. Whereas if you have somebody from outside, that just brings in a different perspective. And I think having someone inside and outside is great, because you have those different perspectives. For example, I work at Intel. There's a lot of people that have been at Intel for like 20, 30 years. So don't get me wrong, they're amazing mentors, but chances are the advice they give me is going to be very Intel-centric, right? Yeah. Whereas, these days, you don't plan on being at a company for 20 to 30 years. So probably, if you're looking for advice on a particular topic, you may not want the perspective of someone that's already inside your organization. And just sometimes there's things that you don't want to tell people that work for your company. So those will probably be my top tips.
I love those. All of them are great.
Seems like a lot of info, but
no, I think it's really great, because I think you're so right. There are benefits to having someone who is your mentor within an organization. They understand everything that's going on, but also I think it's just like, especially when you see something from it, sometimes you can't see something with your own eyes, and it sometimes takes someone from an outside point of view looking in. Like sometimes I'm sure everyone's gone home and spoken to their friend or their mum or, you know, a relative about something that's going on in your company, and they've probably given you a perspective going, you know, that's not normal, that doesn't actually happen at this company, or, you know, I've never heard of that happening before, and you've gone, oh, it doesn't, like maybe I should look at, you know, at different ways of doing that. And it's, you know, sometimes you just take something as like, that's normal, that's just what my company does, but it might not be the case in many of other companies. So I think having that outside perspective is really, really valuable. We also wanted to briefly cover the fact that you are a female in tech. Now, not everyone listening to this podcast is going to be female. Not everyone listening to this podcast is going to be in the world of tech. But I think it's really important that we briefly chat about being in that world and how you can kind of get ahead, because I think it's really, really tricky. It's a very male-dominated industry. What's been your experience?
Yeah, my experience has definitely been interesting. So I guess, so I work as part of a global team, and in terms of like, there's a European team and there's only like 4 of us and I'm the only female. But then in terms of like my immediate team, there are a couple females in my team, but just in general, there's more males in the industry than there are females. And it's definitely been an interesting one, to be honest. So I remember actually when I first started at the company, one of the comments that I really didn't appreciate as somebody who's always been ambitious and has always wanted to, you know, be like CEO or CMO of a massive company, whatever. There was one of our female leaders, and one of my colleagues said, oh, you know, like she mustn't care about her kids. And I was like, why? And they were like, oh, because she's flying over the world the whole time. Like, you know, she clearly doesn't care about her kids. Like, if you want a job like that, like, you surely can't care about your kids. And I was just so like angry. I was like, what? Like, do you not realize that like it takes a male and a female to both make kids? And it's just like, people think women can't have it all, and I just genuinely think they can.
We've talked about that so much on the podcast, you know, about, you know, how I think it scares a lot of people in their 20s because they feel like, you know, I think they're scared of things like that getting said. Like, how dare someone have that perspective, like, on what is your decision in your life, and like no one can tell you that you don't love your kids just because of what they think your life looks like. That's not true.
And it also just makes you second doubt yourself, because you're like, what? Like, what if he's right? Maybe like this dream I have in my head like isn't actually going to happen, because if I want kids, I can't do that. And then also another one which I remember is when I first started, we had like a VP, a really important VP coming over, and my whole team had been asked to create a presentation on like their plan for the next year. And I'd spent ages doing this plan, but obviously, of course, because I was like the youngest, I was the newest, I was last on the agenda. So anyway, everyone had gone through their presentations and had gone over time. So I only had about 20 minutes to give mine, which was supposed to be like a 30-minute plus slot. And I remember I started giving my presentation, which I'd spent hours on. And there was one slide where everyone had something to say. And it just turned into this whole massive debate. And I could not get the conversation back to me. It was like all of these men having a massive debate, and I was just standing there like, come on guys, and they were just all like ignoring me or not hearing me. And I remember like I ran out of time, number one, because I couldn't bring the conversation back to mine, but I just remember I ran away and I like ran into toilets and burst out crying, because I was number one, so upset, and I was so embarrassed that I'd spent like, you know, hours each night doing this presentation which no one heard, and I just didn't have the authority to bring the conversation back to me. And when that happened, after that happened, I was just like, you know what, that's like never going to happen again. Like, I need to make sure like I have authority and like people respect me and stuff like that. And I think part of it was because I was new, and part of it was because I was young, and I think part of it was just because they were being a bit dicks anyway. So yeah, I've had.
If you could go back to that situation, like, what would you do differently?
I think I would have just been more adamant. I think I just would have been more assertive about the situation. I think because I was new and I was junior, I felt like I couldn't. And I was just like, come on, guys. But I would have been like, look, guys, this is my presentation. Like, I only have 10 minutes. Like, you need to be quiet. Because that's what I would do
like,
now.
That made me like, I'm listening. I'm so listening.
But I would have got really irritated, but I just felt like I couldn't. But after that, I was like, that's never going to happen again. Like, I'm never going to feel like that, and I'm never letting myself be put through it. And it's funny because I was telling it the other day, and one of my colleagues were like, I know exactly the time that you were speaking about, and I'm so sorry because I never realized that is how you felt. And it's just, people don't necessarily do it on purpose, but they still do it. So in terms of things that have helped me with that, I think just like, I always put myself out there. I always try and get to know people. And it was also especially hard because a lot of the people that were in this presentation when I was giving it, they'd not met me before, they didn't know me, so that we didn't have that personal connection. And obviously now it's hard, but I work with majority of my colleagues in the US, and honestly, I didn't meet most of them until like a year and a half, 2 years in the role. And once I met them, that relationship was completely different. Like if I ever wanted to talk to them, they would be there. But until then, I was just this voice on like Skype or Zoom. And this was before COVID. So we like use Zoom and Skype and stuff, but no one used video. It's just a phone call.
Yeah.
So I've made a conscious effort, like whenever something work related happens, like I know it sounds stupid, but even if I don't feel like I want to go to it, I go to it just so that I can meet people, just so that I can be known, just that people can see me. Because from that, you build relationships and like ultimately you do like gain respect.
You benefit, yeah.
And then, you know, just ensuring that my work gets visibility as well, because from that you like build respect. People give you more respect. So whenever I'm doing something, I'd always be clear with my manager, like I'm working on this, like can you make sure it gets seen, or can you show it to this person? Or sometimes even I'd be a bit cheeky and I'd like send my stuff that I've been working on like directly to the VP so that he would see it. And then of course like he'd like it, and then on top of his email, he'd send around an email like, look at this amazing work that Shoshanna has done. So then everyone sees that I've got that good relationship with this senior person, and then ultimately respect comes to me. I mean, I don't know if it should be like that. Should I have to try so hard to have respect or authority? I don't know, but those are just some
I think
things
as a
that
young
work for
person,
me.
you're just trying to establish yourself within a company, aren't you? You're just trying to get like respect. So I do think we potentially maybe have to work harder than those that look a little bit older or have that previous experience. We probably do need to work that a little bit, you know, harder to get ourselves noticed and stuff like that. But, you know, I think you've shown like what a positive outlook that can have on your career. Well, obviously you, in terms of your career and in terms of like the platform you built with Fairy Job Mother alongside your career, it really looks like you kind of, from the outside, you have it kind of like all figured out. Like, that's one of the things that we like to break down the barriers on the podcast. You know, as you already mentioned, nobody has it all figured out. Nobody knows exactly what they're doing. We're all working through something at the moment. So is there something that you yourself are trying to work on being better at the moment? Something that you're trying to improve at?
Yes, and I think you already know what it is, Gaby.
We chatted about it on our road trip.
Hopefully I'm not going to sound like an idiot, and I haven't been going at 1,000 miles per hour.
You haven't.
Because, so one thing that I am trying to work on is my speech or my communication skills. So I do everything very fast. I have a very fast brain. I tend to talk very fast, which sometimes gets a little bit much for people. And I have had feedback in the past that people have found me hard to understand, or just due to how quick I speak, it's just a little bit overwhelming. So that's something I've been working on, and I've actually just completed 20 hours of effective communication coaching with a speech coach, where we've been working on all different types of things. Speed is just one of them, but like how to make what you're saying more engaging, how to come across more engaging. So yes, I've been working on that, and I have definitely seen some improvements, and I'll be definitely listening to this podcast episode and watching this podcast episode to see how I can further improve. So yeah, But
I think that's a really like great example of someone who goes, yeah, like I've got this whole platform and everything, but I'm still learning. I'm still trying to improve. I'm still trying to make myself better. I remember like the reason that you and I know each other is because we both spoke at an event back in the summer, wasn't it? And literally I remember you specifically reaching out. I think I was hosting, you were delivering a workshop on careers and stuff like that. And afterwards, I think you messaged and said like, you know, like, do you have any feedback? And I was like, gosh, no one has ever like asked me like, you know, did you have any feedback on like the presentation I delivered? And I was like, it was great. Like, you know, I was really, really positive, like, because I thought what you delivered was fab. But I think the fact that you actively go out there and you actively ask people, how can I improve? How can I do this better? How can I do that? That's such a positive attitude to have. I think so many people are afraid to ask those questions, to go, could you give me a bit of feedback on this? Because how can you get better if you don't accept that feedback and listen to what other people have to say? And yeah, obviously they're not always going to have it right or whatever. And I think a lot of young people are maybe afraid to ask, you know, afraid to kind of hear small amounts of criticism about themselves, because it can feel like, you know, a blow. But at the same time, you've gone, how can you improve on something if you don't know it exists? Like you've identified something that you think you can be better at. You've gone, you know, and actually gone out there and found a course that can help you get better at doing that, which is only going to help you not in your current role, but also in your fairy job on the role, and in any future situation you land yourself in. Those skills are so important. So I think that's a really positive mindset to have. So
thank you, Gaby.
Yeah,
I know. I think just on that feedback point, I love gaining feedback, because like you said, it's the only way you're going to improve. And it sounds funny, but I used to have like a Google form that I sent people at work, and it was like and I used to send it like at the end of the week, but then I think people just got a bit annoyed of like filling it in all the time. So I stopped.
What was on this Google form?
It was just like, how would you rate my communication style from like very good this week, or like, is there anything I can like things like that?
Oh
like,
my
is there
God,
anything I
I
can
love
improve
that.
on? I used to, but like people made fun of me in like a jokey way, but I was just like, yeah, it's a bit too much.
That
as well
is like,
for me right now.
I don't know many people that have that kind of attitude, that they're like, you know, they're openly really wanting to hear feedback of how they like want to improve. I think that's so good.
Yeah.
Like, you know, sometimes I just don't want to hear it. I'm like, tell me I did a good job, and like, that's it. Like, you know, I think it's really refreshing to hear someone who's gone, no, like, I can learn from these people around me and they can give me feedback. And most of the time they're going to be really nice about it as well. Like, you know, like nice bit of praise, and then sandwich it with like something you could improve on. Like, that's the teacher in me that would say that. But, you know, I think that's a really positive attitude. I don't think you should be embarrassed about that at all. One of the questions I like asking people is, what's made you more confident in your 20s? So obviously in the past 4 years, what's helped you really, really grow in confidence?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I think, again, like, I don't want to sound repetitive, but I've been lucky enough to have like really good managers, and they've definitely helped my confidence, because like, you know, if I've had a question, or if I've had something that I wanted to do, like, they've given me that opportunity and they've believed in me in order to give me these opportunities. So I would say like having like good managers who you can rely on is definitely one thing that's helped me with my confidence. I think just like another thing I would say is just like, it sounds stupid, but being myself, because a lot of the time, maybe when I've been in like relationships or I've been in like friendships, I'm like a very outgoing person. I get like obsessed with things. I'm like a bit full on sometimes, but like for some people that's like too much. So I felt like I've had to like dim myself down a lot. And obviously that just wasn't me. So in some situations I've come across like shyer than I actually am. So I think just like being myself, and like people actually like me for being myself, and like,
like,
not
you're
everyone,
amazing.
like not everyone's gonna like me, but like I don't need everybody to like,
No,
and
so
one
true.
thing I've learned is like, that's not, if someone doesn't like me, that's not my problem, like that's their problem.
100%.
I don't need to know if you don't like me, like you just do that and that's cool, but I've done nothing to you. So I think just being myself, and yeah.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. So where can we find you on social media?
Yes, you can find me on social media at The Fairy Job Mother. That's my Instagram.
Such a cool name.
And TikTok and LinkedIn.
Yeah. So, and also one of the things that is so exciting that you've got coming up, which is amazing, is your brand new career planner. Tell us all about it.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up, Gaby. It's a lovely little plug. So I've been working on this for a really long time, and it's honestly a product that I wish that I had myself. So I love stationery. I love writing things down and stuff like that. But every planner I've had, or every journal I've had, they do have like, they maybe have one section or one page on all things careers. But I think throughout my career, and even now, I've really just needed something, how can I map out my career? What are the steps I need to take to get to this level, or to get this promotion, or what do I even want? Or like, how do I even go about mapping out career goals? Or maybe even at the beginning of my career, or even potentially now actually, because sometimes I wake up and I'm like, do I actually want to be doing this? Really mapping out, okay, like, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, this is what I'm actually interested in, how can I turn this into a career? So that, for me, I've been looking for it for a really long time, doesn't exist. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to create my own thing using all my knowledge that I've gained throughout corporate, throughout my career. I've created a career journal, career planner, essentially, which is launching very, very soon. And
so excited.
Yeah, it's a 60-page self-guided career planner. All the pages and prompts and stuff like that have been designed by me. And yeah, I'm really excited. So I have a little Instagram page for that called FJM Planner. And if you stay tuned, there's going to be some more information on that very soon.
They look gorgeous as well. What you've designed is so clever. And I think there is definitely a massive gap in the market for that. So well done. I think it's going to be amazing. We always end the podcast by asking the same question to all of our guests. And it's basically, if you could look your 20-year-old self in the eye and just give her one piece of advice, what would you say?
I don't know. I think for me, one thing that I've realised, which I wish I knew sooner, is like, what is your end? I feel like I say goals a lot, but they are very important to me. Like, everything you do needs to have that end goal in mind. So if you know where you want to be in the next 5 years, like every decision, not just career-wise, even personal-wise, like, think, is this going to take me closer to that goal? Because if it's not, then like, why am I doing that? Because you can spend a lot of time, you can spend time getting new roles, getting promotions, but if they're not taking you in the direction that you need to be taken in, then you're just wasting time. And don't get me wrong, like, of course you can change your goals. Your goals are constantly evolving over time. You don't have to want to be like a superhero when you're 5 and then still want to be it when you're like 21.
Yeah.
But just like have that end goal in mind, and like, just make sure that you say yes to things that align with that goal.
I think that is a brilliant piece of advice, and it is literally one that I would give. I think it's so true for anyone right now. If you know where you want to go, set that goal, really focus on it, only say yes to the things that are going to take you closer to that goal. Well, thank you, Shoshanna. It's been so lovely to have you in the studio. We would, of course, it wouldn't be a podcast for Shoshanna if we didn't ask you for your feedback.
Oh,
so 100% take a screenshot of whatever you're listening to this now. Tag us in stories at Fairy Job Mother, at Talk 20s. Tell us that you've been listening to this episode. Tell us what you thought. We'd love to hear what you think about it, and tell everyone that you've listened to this episode. But thank you so much for listening. Thank you for coming into the studio.
Thank you, Gaby. It's been so much fun.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Talk 20s podcast. I hope it inspired you in some way and pops a little pep in your step for this week. Got a spare minute? It would mean the absolute world if you could subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with a friend. We're on a mission to help as many 20-somethings navigate their 20s as we can, and we really cannot do it without your support. We also love to hear from you. You can find us on all platforms via the handle at Talk20s. And if you're struggling with something in your 20s that we haven't already covered in the podcast, DM us and let us know so we can cover it in a future episode. And for more stories of inspiration and resources to help you make the best of your 20s, head to our website, talk20s.com.